This is a sport. Okay, before you head to the comments and start arguments over the subject with people, I just want to clarify that that is not what this video is about at all. But for the purposes of improvement, I think it is useful to treat it like a sport. If you want to cube just for fun, then that's great. Keep doing that. But if you want to win competitions someday and break records, you have to have the mindset that supports that. And in this case, I think the mindset of an athlete really does support that. My first few years of cubing, I did not do this. I just cubed for fun and expected to eventually get really good, and I didn't take my improvement very seriously. And it didn't quite work out that way, and I got frustrated and quit. In the few years I wasn't cubing, I started rock climbing and have learned a lot about how to train for improvement. And since picking speed cubing back up again a few months ago, I've implemented a lot of what I've learned from sports and sports training to cubing, and so far it's been paying off. So how do we create our own training plan for the Rubik's Cube? Have you ever wondered how Max Park holds and keeps breaking so many records? He doesn't practice all 6 of his events at once. There isn't enough time in the world to do that, even if you have superpowers like Max. He practices 1 or 2 events at a time, and he chooses what to practice depending on other people. If someone is getting close to one of his world records, he focuses on practicing just that event for a month or two, and then he pushes the record even further, buying him a lot of time, and then he repeats the process for other events. The only time this changes is for big competitions like nationals or worlds, where he has to defend multiple titles, so he practices more than usual. So you should copy this in your own training, focus on 1 or 2 events for a few months, then switch things up and practice a couple different ones. At the moment, I am focused on 4x4 and 5x5, but in a few weeks, I am going to shift back to the 3x3 and probably some 6x6 as well. This is something I do a lot for rock climbing. While you're on the wall, sometimes it is really hard to realize that you are making tiny mistakes because you're so used to climbing that way that all of those little bad habits feel natural, but they add up and cause a lot of issues. In cubing, you're turning so fast during solves and your brain is working so hard to keep up, you usually don't have the capacity to analyze how efficient and smooth your solves are while you're doing them. Recording an average of 5 or 12 can help you identify things you need to work on completely on your own. The more solves you record, the better usually. Not enough people do this, and I have found it to be extremely useful. Then watch some solves and walkthroughs from fast people. Find someone who averages a little bit better than you. I found that the sweet spot is like 30 to 40% faster because the things you'll notice are different in their solves will be easy enough for you to identify and implement into your own training. If you pick someone too fast, there will likely be things that are a little bit over your head. For example, if you average 30 seconds on 3x3, you probably won't be able to learn that much from Timon Koleshinsky. Compare this person's solves to your own and find the glaring differences. This can be as obvious as their splits for different steps, or it could be more complicated, like their efficiency for certain F2L cases. For example, I've learned recently that on 4x4 it is not always best to do OLL parity before OLL. Like in this case, if I were to do OLL parity, you see I end up with an L. But if I were to just do a U2 and a soon before, and then do OLL parity, even with those extra moves at the beginning and end of the parity, it's still going to be faster because you got a much better OLL. Now obviously, if you know full ZBLL, this is a little bit different. You have to weigh those things on your own. But for me, this has been pretty helpful lately. You should focus on improving your weaknesses, but it's also okay to continue improving the things you're already good at. It's only going to make you better. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is set a goal. As I mentioned, I'm going to be moving back into 3x3 practice mode soon, so what are my current goals for that? Currently I average low 8 seconds, 7.9 on a good day, and so in the short term, like 4 to 6 weeks, I want to get a sub 7.5 average of 100. Currently my best since coming back to the speed cubing is 8.01, so it's a little bit ambitious, but it's definitely possible. It's also worth noting that you want to aim high, but not unrealistically high. Just high enough that it pushes you that little extra bit, and works to be a pretty motivating factor in your training, but not so high that it is impossible and becomes demotivating. And then you want to decide on 2 or 3 things to focus on for that event based on the weaknesses you identified in step 2. So for me, I'm going to be working on last layer, specifically learning and improving ZBLL. I also want to work on improving my fluidity through cross and F2L. Sometimes I'm not so confident in my cross plus one planning, even though I normally plan it perfectly, and I often pause between specifically my second and third pairs for some reason. Lastly, I want to improve my turning speed. My look ahead is often a little bit ahead of how fast I can turn the cube with good technique. So usually when I try to turn above like 8 TPS, I lock up a lot, and that's probably the biggest thing holding me back currently. Alright, now we're going to figure out some practice methods for those things. Oftentimes, these practice methods already exist and there are dozens of YouTube videos about them, and sometimes you have to invent your own. P.S. If there's something that you're trying to improve and there aren't really any videos out there about it, or not very good ones anyway, just let me know in the comments. I will definitely look into making videos about those things. For me, the ZBL thing is pretty easy. I'm going to learn new algs, and then I'm going to drill these algs, as well as ZBL algs that I've already learned. And there are plenty of websites for doing both of these things, so that's pretty easy to do. For fluidity during my cross and then my transition into F2L, I can just do a lot of blindfolded cross plus one. That's not how you spell blindfolded. For my F2L fluidity, to eliminate that pause I often have between my second and third pairs, I can have CS Timer generate cross-solved scrambles and solve a lot of just F2L. So that one's pretty easy. And then for improving turning speed, a lot of people can improve their all-around turning just by drilling PLLs and OLLs. But quite frankly, it isn't very helpful to do that at my speed because you can't really do E-perms much faster than 22 TPS. So the best way for me to personally improve turning speed is by doing down solves. A lot of you have probably never heard of this because it isn't talked about very often, but Laser Monkey made a video about it like 5 or 6 years ago, and I think it would be a good way for me to improve my technique, so I'm going to test it out for a few months and see if that works. It's also worth noting that you want to do a lot of timed solves as well to practice implementing all of the things you're learning in your focused practice. Timed solves should still be focused and deliberate. Don't let yourself go into that like mindless solving mode that everybody does for hours on end. You're not actually going to improve anything. Create a rough schedule. You don't have to map everything out minute by minute. You're not going to stick to that. But there are a few rules about how you should divide up your practice time. And it doesn't matter how much you're able to practice, just make sure that your goals are realistic given the amount of time you know you're going to be able to allot to training. Rule 1, don't practice one thing for too long. It's really easy to get physically and or mentally worn out when you're doing dedicated focused practice, so there's a limit to the amount of improvement you'll actually be able to get out of a session. Rule 2, split it up. Practice 1 or 2 things per day and practice different things the next. In a recent interview with The Cubicle, Timon says his time is split roughly 50-50. He spends a couple hours doing timed solves and a couple hours learning algs and doing untimed practice. This split might be a little bit extreme, but I would say for every hour of training, definitely don't do more than 2 hours of timed solves. This is a 1/3, 2/3 split. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to put on my schedule is ZBLL, because that takes up a lot of time. I already know that just with the way my class schedule and things are right now, as well as my rock climbing training, The day in the middle of the week that I have the most time to practice cubing is on Tuesdays because that's the day I don't climb. So I'm gonna learn ZBLLs on Tuesdays. And the way I do that is I'll learn a set of 12 at once because I found that that's the most effective way for me to do that. And then for the next couple days, I will just drill those 12 algorithms. So on Wednesdays and Thursdays, I will just write drill algs. And then Friday, I also have a lot of time because I don't have classes on Fridays. So I can learn even more ZBLLs on Fridays. So that's 24 per week. And then on Saturday and Sunday, I will drill those new algs again. This gives me Monday, which is a day where I know I'm not going to have as much practice time anyway, and it's also like a nice break between just drilling tons of new algorithms, which can be really helpful when you're trying to learn 474 or whatever that number is. The next thing is blindfolded cross plus one and F2L fluidity, which both take a lot of mental energy. So I'm gonna want to do those things on separate days. I'm trying to think like what days I have the most time for. We'll start with Monday because I don't have anything written on Monday yet. And we'll just write cross plus one. And I'm gonna want to try and do everything at least twice a week. So I'm going to pick another day. We'll say Thursday. That seems like that will work fine. And then F2L we're gonna do on different days. So Saturday is good. That's an F, trust me. And then on Wednesdays, we'll do that as well. And then down solves take a lot of like physical energy with the fingers. If your fingers are tired from doing lots of solves, you probably don't want to do down solves. For me, I do a lot of rock climbing, which tires your fingers out a lot. I constantly have sore fingers and can almost never turn at my peak. So the days when I do down solves, I know are gonna be rest days. And for me, rest days are Tuesdays and Saturdays. So I'm going to do down solves on those days. And then last but not least, just good old timed focused sessions. So my timed solves I'm going to do on days where I have time. So I know Fridays I have more time. So I'll do timed solves on Friday. And Sundays I have more time. And then during the week, I could probably do Mondays as well. And Tuesdays are iffy because I like to do editing on Tuesdays. But if I have time for it, I'll do more timed solves on those days. So that's 4 days a week that I'm doing timed solves, which is twice as much as I'm doing anything else except for maybe learning ZBLL, which inherently just takes tons of time. Alright guys, so that's it for this video. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below. I tend to be very responsive down there. If you liked this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it for some reason, give it a thumbs down. And subscribe so you'll be notified of videos that I post in the future. And as always, keep on solving.